Definitely not from here. This research project sought information and solutions to the housing needs of Indigenous women both on and off reserve. Canada, a name given to the territory that is the scope of our research, a name given by its colonizers. However, Canada, with all its beauty, has a season that demands respect, and that is the Canadian winters. Proper shelter is the utmost importance. Housing standards must be adapted to the Canadian environment. Anyone living in this part of the world will know the importance of keeping warm and having a proper insulation and filtered clean air, as they will live enclosed within their dwellings for a large amount of their everyday life during winter. The ancestors knew how to build to survive those harsh Canadian winters.
I'm Karen Matilla. I'm the curator of Scanadot Village and Museum here in Mount Bridges, Ontario. And we're in the Longwoods Road Conservation Area. We have a very unique situation here that the place was started 46 years ago, and a local First Nations community donated our log cabins that we're about to go visit. When the pioneer era came and treaties were being settled, the Chippewa were the first ones to move to the area, and we also have the Munsee Delaware, came a little later, and Oneida came after that. So the three communities each gave us one of these log cabins that relatively aged to 200 years ago. So they're traditional white ash cabins, and we'll go have a look. Come on. They have to be ready to survive the winters, since the weather has not changed all that much. So they would be lived in seasonally, and so when you're preparing for winter, as it has been through time, you want to make sure that your house is secure. So fall is that last chance to get everything ready for winter, and then by the time the spring comes, everything's coming to life again. Then you can just continually replace the layers in between the houses to make them. Nothing's going to ever be airtight, but you want it to be able to expand and contract. To start at life 1,000 years ago for the First Nations, and this land was traditionally the Longhouse people. Today we call them the Six Nations. Oneida are the closest relatives, so we use the Oneida language here. So everybody thinks of the palisade as just being about protection, but it's not just about people and keeping animals out, keeping your children safe. But through the years, it really is about blocking the winds that can get quite wicked around here. So this actually tempers the winds so that the people can live inside and carry on their daily life. So it's very practical as well. So these are, in our interpretation, we usually have 3 long houses. One might be in a state of repair or through time, but being that the Oneida has inspired us, we have one for each of the traditional clans that would have been. They're all families that are the extended families that would live together, one family in each longhouse. They are matriarchal, so the clan mother would be the one giving out work to do and make sure she picks the right people for the right job. So you can see slight differences as we build each one, and they'll have a little bit taller look. The oldest bark is on the one that's on our far right, and that is covered in basswood. When we move to the middle, it looks like it's complete from this side, but it is actually only half covered. This is elm bark, which for the first time in the 2000s it was able to be cut again because of the 1960s with the Dutch elm disease. So historically, looking at records that the French kept when they met the First Nations for the first time, they said that they were using elm bark because it was readily available. It's very pliable and easy to work with. Our workers didn't really like working with it too much because it's very flexible, almost too much. But what happened when we had our first winter is it is the best that it has ever been for waterproofing. So I now understand completely why if you can get elm for your house, then that would be the first choice. I think we can go into the middle one with only half the bark. It actually has better light than the other 2. Yeah. So this is our middle longhouse. It is the oldest frame. So it is made with cedar, and cedar has a natural preservative, so it is an excellent building material. It will last 15 to 20 years. So in the past, they would only have to really build the house once because they would eventually move on to another area. The time period we're showing here is 800 to 1200 AD. So it is the beginning of agriculture, so they are staying in places for longer periods of time. They might have 4 houses, 3-4 houses at this time, and the palisade would have been a larger open area around the villages. We made ours a little more compact for touring purposes, but every place there's a pole that leaves a stain in the ground, and you can just follow along and see how long a longhouse is. We can figure out where the doors are. One step from the outside, you'll find the poles that are holding up the roof. They're usually a little bit larger. A step and a half, you'll find the circle of rocks where the fire pits were. And for archaeology, really, it is, I call it some of the boring archaeology, but that's because everything had to be in its place in a longhouse because you have the fires down the middle. Yeah. So that's your lookout platform. We purposely made it a little bit lower because some children don't like heights, but it's still high enough to look over to the river. So we're actually here on a hill, and it's a gentle slope down to the river below. And they would have lookouts keeping watch for animals going down, of course, to the river. And watching people when they go down to collect water, and just as a safety feature.
Here we look at off-reserve challenges the ill-prepared Indigenous population are faced with.
So I'm Amin Wazad. I'm a professor of economics at HEC Montreal. I hold a professorship in real estate and urban economics. So my area of expertise is housing and the development of cities. I am fascinated by it. I think it's one of the key issues of our times, if not the most important issue of our time. You know, if you think about it, most of people's wealth or lack of wealth is actually due to housing. We talk about, you know, diversified portfolios of assets and all, but when you look at the actual portfolio that people have, more than 80% of that portfolio is invested in housing. And so if we don't understand housing, we're missing a big chunk of what affects people's lives. And you know, there's been discussions about this book by Thomas Piketty, who's become the superstar of economics, and his book is called The Capital, but it should have been titled Housing, and the reason is that we need housing to live in. Prices have skyrocketed. The median house price in Vancouver is above $1 million. Median house price in Toronto is above $700,000. And in Montreal, people say we're more fortunate because the median house price is about $300,000, but it has to be scaled by the income of families that are purchasing these housing units. And there, because the median income in Montreal is slightly lower than the median income in Toronto, we're actually not faring that well. So I have done work with the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, whose mandate is to provide affordable housing to Canadians. An immense challenge, and they acknowledge themselves that there's a long way to go to make housing affordable for all Canadians. So I've done work with them to assess whether housing is affordable neighborhood by neighborhood in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, but in all other hundreds of CMAs across Canada. And one of the things we've seen is that if the mortgage payment or the rental payment should not exceed 30% of a person's income, a large majority of Montreal neighborhoods are unaffordable for the median household income as measured by the Canadian census. So we've got a major issue here, because not only are households bidding for houses, competing for housing, but there's other headwinds that are coming our way that are affecting our ability to purchase housing. One of those headwinds is the influx of foreign capital into Canadian cities. There's been recently this work on British Columbia suggesting that it was written by 3 academics from British Columbia, suggesting that house prices would be 7 to 8% lower had there not been those flows of foreign capital into Vancouver. So of course, foreign capital and money laundering are 2 different issues that I'm not conflating. But one of the key questions we may want to ask is that if housing is a good that is used by our citizens, should foreign capital be competing for the needs of average Canadians? The median family income is about $70,000. So we are at 10 times family income, which is a big contrast with many other metropolitan areas, including in the U.S., where housing has stayed affordable. So if you think about it, if you just take a 20% equity on a $700,000 house, that means that we need a down payment of $140,000, cash. That means also a good credit score, and so that means that there's going to be a $560,000 loan on a $70,000 annual income, it doesn't take a lot of calculations to realize that the debt to income ratio, which is the ratio of the total mortgage payments over household income, is going to be above 30%, which means that the median house for a household is not affordable for a household. So that has led to tremendous inequalities, and just to give a picture that in Vancouver and Toronto, that's slightly less true in Montreal. Rental options are scarce because social housing is scarce. At the beginning of the 1980s, there was a large cut in the amount of new social housing units built by the federal government. It was driven in part by a fiscal crisis that led the federal government to transfer some of the social housing responsibilities onto provinces. Now, the issue is that provinces have not caught up, in the sense that they have not increased the amount of social housing units that are available. We have to think about the next generation and think about first-time home buyers who may not be benefiting from increased house prices. In fact, they may be hurt by increased house prices. In Montreal, given the large share of rental in Montreal, we have a unique opportunity, which is to tell Montreal residents that increases in house prices are not benefiting the median Montreal resident. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Quebec or Montreal were putting in place a non-resident speculation tax to make housing affordable.
In our research, we found off-reserve issues were extremely important for us to note. According to Stats Canada, the number of Indigenous people living in Canada as of 2016 is just under 1.7 million, and over 250,000 live and work outside of their communities. The Indigenous population is the youngest and fastest growing demographic in Canada. The main focus for this project, the female Indigenous population, due to their higher vulnerability, the subsequent lack of sustainability, and the stability of their children. Understanding the housing crisis faced by so many Indigenous women will go a long way to understand why so many women are trapped in intolerable situations. Let's work together to find as many solutions as soon as possible and make a difference. This is not just an Indigenous problem. It is a problem that affects everyone who live in the Dominion state of Canada. Reconciliation begins with taking personal responsibility to understand, respect, and help our neighbors regain their rights to a good life. And now we begin our journey.
My name is Andrea Jibb, and I am the Indigenous Community Planner at Atlosa Family Healing Services in London, Ontario.
My name is Shelley Longboat. I'm the housing support worker for Atlosa.
Right, so Indigenous homelessness is situated within a much greater context, so the context of colonization of Turtle Island. And so the pathways to homelessness for an Indigenous person are intrinsically related to this history. And so that history is quite extensive, but we know through the formation of the Indian Act, which follows from the 60 Scoop and residential schools. These things are all connected. So within this the context of the Indian Act, Indigenous people had a really strict set of rules that governed their whole lives, and they still do today. So Indigenous homelessness is very closely related to this. And so within an urban setting, the pathways to Indigenous homelessness are extensive, and one of the major ones is stemming from housing conditions on reserve. And so housing on reserve is dictated in many ways by the Indian Act, right? So how many houses can be built in a year relative to the growing size of the community, and a land that doesn't grow with the community necessarily. And so we have growing communities where Indigenous people are one of the fastest growing segments of the population, but there's no housing or land to accommodate that within the communities. So you end up with situations of overcrowding and homes that are in need of very basic repairs. And then we also have the social conditions on reserve, where there are really high rates of abuse, substance use, violence, and these also need to be situated within the context of the history of colonization, because with residential schools in 60 Scoop, it was the family unit itself that was targeted by these systems. And so the family units are often in a lot of disarray, and we see a lot of violence. And so these are all some of the pathways to how an Indigenous person might end up in an urban setting and into homelessness. So in terms of Indigenous homelessness in London, London has a 29% rate of Indigenous homelessness. So what that means is Indigenous people make up roughly 29% of the homeless population. And it's probably actually higher, because this is done through a point-in-time count methodology, and so it doesn't account for the number of people, couch surfing or staying in VAW shelters or violence against women shelters, or those who are precariously housed. We have there's been some really good community-based research done in London, and so from that research that was led by Indigenous organizations, we had about a 40% youth homelessness rate. And then 68% of folks who we spoke to experiencing homelessness said that attributed their homelessness to relationship breakdown, abuse, or violence in some way. 1 in 5 Indigenous adults in London are precariously housed or homeless. And then 1 in 3 Indigenous men in London were homeless, precariously housed, or living within an institution. And shockingly, 92% of Indigenous children in London are living in households that fall below the the before tax low income cutoff rate. And so when we look at that number, we can see that that's probably a very clear pathway to precarious housing or homelessness. Maybe Shelley, do you want to talk about what you're seeing within housing?
And working in a homeless environment, what I'm finding is a lot of the clientele that we work with is fleeing addictions or any spiritual, mental, physical trauma, abuse. A lot of the 60 Scoop, and also what I found is a lot of them incarceration. That's why a lot of the Indigenous people reoffend again, because just due to the lack of housing, or if they're fighting an addiction or whatever the reason may be, or abuse, they can't find the housing, so which leaves them on the streets, which leaves them homeless, so which brings up the incarceration rate for our Indigenous people that are incarcerated to date. Human trafficking is another big one too, where they get stuck in the system and then they don't know how to get out of it, so they can either lead to homelessness again, or else just individuals not being familiarized what human trafficking is, and which will lead them eventually, under the assumption that they have suitable housing, but then at the spur of the moment, they could be kicked out the same day, the next day, or so, which leaves them on the street. So human trafficking is a big one right now. Yeah.
Next stop, Northern Ontario, to talk to a building inspector on molding problems and a few issues on reserve housing conditions.
Hi, my name is Doug Carlson. I'm currently a building inspector for the City of London. I've had a number of years of experience in all types of homes, right from garages up to multi-story buildings. I do have to say though, there is a need for affordable housing and for the people, especially on the reserves. I have experience and have been on reserves, though not in an official capacity as inspector, as a guest, and there is a need for good housing on our reserves. And As a building inspector for the City of London, I am involved with property standards. It's a bylaw that applies to existing homes to keep a home at a minimum standard. I don't believe any such standard exists on current reserves. We can have homes where the exterior shell is leaking through flashing, through chimneys, through windows, foundations, and the like. Mold is very common. It's found both inside and outside your home. When it becomes a problem is that when the mold exceeds so many parts per million than what's outside. The City of Calgary came up with a standard that the City of London used to remediate homes with bad mold simply by a leaking roof or what have you. Mold comes in many forms. There are over 100,000 different types of mold spores. Some of them are very deadly to people. I'm not a mold expert. For one to come in, one would require an industrial hygienist to come in and do an assessment of the mold. Everyone is different in terms of I'm very susceptible to mold. I have found mold in people's homes simply by me being exposed and said, "You've got mold here, something's leaking." And I found it in my daughter's house. And it was some damage flashing up on the roof, and the water had come down into the wall, and it was starting to mold inside, and I could actually smell it. The London Middlesex Health Unit provided us with the standard. They did help us a lot in mold remediation, and there are different levels of that. The mold attacks many things. It can attack wood, leather, drywall, especially the farther a product is away from a true wood, the easier it is for the mold to attack.
We travel where we had the very unique privilege to record the housing issue stories from many Indigenous women at the Strengthening Indigenous Research Capacity Conference in Ottawa. Next are some of their stories.
I was there in this one-bedroom apartment just by myself and living in the basement. My living window was just like ground level, and I seen the sewer part here, the electrical part there, and I seen only 4 trees and then the grass, and I said, "Is this it?" That's how I woke up in my thinking, like, you know, what am I doing here? What is it for me here? There is nothing here. That's where I woke up. And not too long after that, I got, I don't know what I did, but I ended up missing to pay rent, and I ended up getting kicked out anyways, because you have to pay rent. And at the time, because being a little bit younger, I didn't really have no idea about stuff like that, because you're not taught stuff like that, right? So, but anyways, that's how I kind of had my awakening there as to the living part of it, and thinking I'm just only an Indian in the city living in an apartment and paying bills and living by this system, which is really caged. That's how I felt. There was no freedom in it. People are always watching you. And but anyways, that's how I found out to get on my feet. And I took out my old maps and I looked at our trap line and really realized, went back to thinking about how my dad used to say, "You got to go back to the trap line." Well, he didn't call it the trap line. He says, where we live. And so anyways, that's, and I said, yeah. So before he passed away, he did have a talk with me and my brother, what we need to do, right? So, and with me, because he used to always take me to the trap line, I was always going there, and he knew I liked it there. So that's where he told me to look after the trap line and, you know, to bring the children back. Go build those cabins. You know what to do. And said, yeah. You know, that's what I told him, right? So that's where it kind of all balled in together. Memories, situation, observation, and needing to do what you got to do from your heart. Never mind what society wants you to bring in as civilized. So that's how I saw it.
For as long as I remember, I think every single one of us has asked for a house. Every single one of us went to meetings to to request a house for their families and for their grandkids and for their families, but we were always denied. We were always told no. We were always told there's no money. We were always denied every single time. So it got to the point that people just gave up asking, you know. When you get told no all the time, you know, you get to a point that you give up hope. And I think that's what happened in our community, is that a lot of us gave up hope in asking for help. Two people that, you know, dictate your life, and they'll always say no to whatever it is that you ask, whether it's housing, economic development, training opportunities, education, and these are the crucial, you know, like developments that we need as communities to develop and to become, you know, independent. But with these people taking that away from you, but now there's a tug of war because we want our housing, we want to have homes, you know, for our kids, and we're fighting for that. That's exactly why we're here, is because we're fighting to have homes to live in and to live off the system, you know, to get off Indian Northern Affairs funding, to get off whatever funding that they give to the First Nations people. We have to get off of that because they're puppeteering our resource development, they're puppeteering our meetings, they're puppeteering every single possibility that could be good for a community. They're exterminating it. They're interfering with everything that the community wants, and all we want is a house.
When I went up to my reserve for the first time to see my people, my family, and how they lived, it was quite a culture shock for me because I knew what a cottage looked like in the middle class. Everything was nice. You had it all. It was all, you know, your washrooms, biffies even. We call them biffies. I don't know. They're like little outhouses. But my father built his, the person that adopted me built his own cottage. So it was neat to watch, or to hear how they did it because I was just a baby. So coming from there and then coming onto my reserve, like I said, it was a culture shock for me because I would actually be in people's houses and I'd be like, where's the washroom? And there was no washroom because all they had was a bucket and a hole, right? So, and that's when I'm 45 now, so that's like 25 years ago. So some of the houses were like that. And to me, some of them looked like shacks. Rundown shacks, really old wood, and then you would see holes in the floors. There were old houses. It's kind of sad. It was poverty. I was shown poverty, a mass poverty for the first time. I seen people on the streets, you know, visually, but nothing like a whole bunch of people just grinding it. To me, it was really hard. I was like, how do they do that? Well, we live off the land and stuff. They still do some traditional fishing and snaring, rabbits, moose hunting, geese. They still do that. Not so much anymore, just the way the world's going. So I found a sneaky way, and I think people found a sneaky way too. They were going to the educational funding for the high school students to give them these, like what she's doing, and they were starting to build houses for the reserve one at a time, but they're learning apprenticeship, right, by carpentry or whatever you call that, house making. So that too, she could even put that into the curriculum and introduce it. Let's build some straw houses for your community, and you know, and then but you give it to someone. Instead of, you know, because there's like hundreds and thousands of us on a list waiting to be housed. So I'm going to be, like, by the time I get lined up for a house, my son will be grown up, right? So, like, I don't have time to wait around.
CMHC, they control that, how the houses are built on reserves, when in fact our people build houses, long houses, teepees. We've had these kind of housing forever, and we still live in a teepee. I spent 43 days here in Gatineau in 2014, living on a teepee on the river. So we can live in this teepee that we lived in, even in the tornado, it stayed. So we can't live in the teepees all winter anymore, but we are not given any of the responsibility to do with what we know that we can. And even on our communities, there are many people there who know how to build. And they're not given opportunities.
We don't really have very much housing for our people on reserve. Going back 20 to 25 years of the history of my people from Briar Lake, our people had division because of the politics or the Indian Act system as we identified it. And at the age of 15, our people just kind of moved out of the reserve because of unresolved differences. And so we've been living in cabins ever since. Most of our people are on social assistance. We don't really have much opportunities to work outside. Outside of the reserve, most of the people that have a job has to be working inside the reserve, and nothing's offered out. And so our people that have lived outside the reserve have tried their best throughout the years to provide their own housings. People help each other out, so everybody's like living in cabins and outside and not much on the inside. I actually don't have a home of my own. I'm 41 years old, but the cabin we have is my dad's cabin, and he just gave me a key, and I'm invited to be there anytime I want.
We are vastly underhoused. There are multiple generations of families living in very small, cramped quarters that are in a state of, in some form of disrepair, whether it's, lack of siding, insulation, mold infested. We live in a very swampy territory, so mold tends to be a big problem in most homes. And no money for updates. A home doesn't last forever. So it needs to be updated and repaired and maintained. So I would say, if you're doing like a report card, and A being great and D being not so great, they would get a D- in terms of honoring relationship to ensure that we have adequate and decent places to live. I think with sustainable housing, you can also grow into what you need. So you might start with something a little bit more modest. If your family grows, the home can grow along with you without a financial burden, hardship. What you need to invest is some education, some know-how, and some hard work. Get down and build your house like we always used to.
Well, first of all, there are several aspects of the need within the community that this is addressing. Firstly, housing. In Indigenous communities generally, Inuit communities, Métis communities, as well as First Nations, there is a huge need for more adequate housing, and for housing that also is more environmentally friendly and related to the context of the environment in which they're being built. Found that many of the substandard housing issues that are brought to our attention here in the Senate, but have also been brought to my attention over the years. I worked in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as well as the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, often related to the fact that houses that were designed for weather conditions in the south just don't function as well and don't hold together as well in the north, where the weather conditions and the environmental conditions are harsher because they're not adapted to those conditions at the outset. So I think having input from community people who have that sense of what the community itself needs and what families need and what kind of housing is going to function best in those communities is really key. And so I support that. But in addition to that, the fact that this is a program that is focusing upon presenting opportunities for women to get involved in the housing industry is also a very important initiative, because the While the unemployment rate for men is very high, the unemployment rate for women is even higher. Women in the particularly northern communities, remote and rural communities, often are overlooked when it comes to statistics reporting on unemployment figures in those areas, and so they're not even counted as the unemployed. But more importantly, they have a significant set of skills that I think are equal to, if not exceed, those of men who are understanding. The women are better understanding of what a particular housing development initiative needs, what kind of housing works best for the families, and what kind of basic concepts a particular housing initiative should address when constructing a house. And so I think all of that just comes together to say this is a perfect project at a perfect time. And so I strongly endorse it. Well, any initiative that creates employment, any initiative that improves training and improves access to jobs and gives individuals an opportunity to participate in the workforce and thereby generally feel that they are contributing better to their families and to the future of their children, I think is a good initiative and is part of what reconciliation is all about, and that is to create a situation where we are able to regain pride in ourselves, not just in terms of our culture and our language, but also in terms of our representation, our participation in society overall. And when we have a program and an initiative which allows for people to get jobs and to contribute to something as important as housing in their community, I think it gives an incredible sense of pride, an important sense of contributing in a positive way to the growth of the community and to the families who are there. And not only they, but members of their family, their children, can point to the fact that, you know, my mother built that house or those houses, and that's important. So I applaud the work that's being done and what it's trying to achieve. Indigenous people who are familiar with their surroundings and who know how to make a project like housing or a school building or a public facility be constructed in a way that is suitable to what's existing already in their community and what their environment tolerates and doesn't tolerate. I think it'll be a better achievement overall than simply bringing an idea from another part of the world or another part of the country even that works well in an urban area but really is not going to work well in a more remote or rural area.
Through our research, we have concluded that sustainable straw bale houses are well-suited, viable options. They are best suited for mold prevention, and their 18-inch thick walls have an R50 insulation value well-suited for heavy winters. They are also a considerate option to the impact in their environment they are built in for many generations, well beyond the next 7 generations to come. We have interviews of Indigenous women who have built straw bale houses and their experiences of living in them.
Oh, it's been well known for many years, especially in First Nations communities where the houses are built with improper materials and untreated wood, where we have issues like mold and mildew and other diseases that are created amongst our children. There's some people that are dying from different types of lung diseases and other diseases that are created by living in mold and mildew. I think that it would be a great concept for our First Nations people right across the land to build these straw bale houses, because the material costs less effectively to build a straw bale house than it does for a true wooden house, and we'd have the choice of the materials that are being made because we can grow our own material. To grow straw across the nation is not a problem because it will grow anywhere. And if the materials are readily available, well, then there's no excuse for us not to have affordable and sustainable housing. I would definitely take a course in that. I would love to build myself a beautiful straw bale house. I've had the opportunity to live on one in Georgina Island, and you know, I was there for 2 winters, and to me, I kept on thinking about it, and I wonder why our women can't build our own homes out of straw bale. It wouldn't cost as much, and if women build their own homes, they've got a home for life.
I started building the house in 1999. My dad gave me a lot to build on here, and I got my finances together and decided I wanted to build a straw bale house, so I studied it up a little bit, and then I looked for a construction plan online, and I found one. Cost me $25. I think it was put out by Habitat for Humanity. So I said, okay, well, I'll contract the building myself, which means you get the materials list and you figure out your budget and you order things and have them delivered. And we're here on the island, so that makes things fun and challenging. And so, yeah, I said, well, I think I'll build a straw bale house because I believe that they'll be more energy efficient, like well insulated. And I was, you know, looking for that and the durability, and I was looking for a cost saving. And also, I was really right into the environmentalism and, you know, how we have to kind of reduce our footprint on the planet. And the worry over climate change wasn't quite as like it is now, but I kind of could see it was coming, so that was another one of my motivations. So it's just a simple two-bedroom bungalow. So the walls are 18 inches thick, and on top of that you put a couple of coats of some kind of plaster to seal it, but you wouldn't have any kind of plastic in there. So what happens is, like, the walls can breathe a little bit better, and the house is very resistant to mold. If you want to reduce your energy costs, that's one way to be environmental. Yeah, so even like the coldest winter, I just have a wood stove and a little extra heater in the bathroom. But aside from that, you manage to stay warm and comfy all through the winter, which is what you need, basically. You know, find it very comforting and relaxing to be at home, and yeah, I find that's inspirational. I mean, if you want to be creative, you know, it's your house, do what you want.
Next, we visit builders of sustainable houses who are teaching students to build their own and are willing to teach them.
You and I were quite the team, unstoppable, a sight unseen, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. You and I will make this through. Together we can beat this too, oh yeah. Oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah. You and I can do anything, oh yeah.
I'm even wearing the t-shirt from the Endeavor Day. Yeah. Ah, it's awesome. We've been making a lot of progress, learning a lot hands-on things. And then on Fridays, like tomorrow, we have theory. So there's also theory involved, that we're not just being general laborers or something. We get to know what's behind everything. So yeah, I'm enjoying it. We're a team of 6 students and everybody gets along very well too. And 3 teachers, so it's like 2 students get 1 teacher. That's awesome.
You may be a builder. And if you're a builder, you may want just the walls, so the enclosure. And so we'll build that, we'll put it on the site, and then you complete the home from there. If you're a home builder and you're a good carpenter, you know some of the trades, you may be in the same position where you would like somebody to put the frame up, the walls, and have it enclosed, and then you can finish it from there. So what's involved in finishing it from there? Well, first of all, there's no plumbing and there's no electrical wiring. Our walls, though, have a service cavity that's all ready for the plumbing and the wiring. So a plumber and an electrician would have to come in and actually run the wires in pre-drilled holes. So it's not an outlandish job to do. So a plumber and an electrician come in and they do their work. You either manufacture yourself or you buy kitchen cabinets, etc. You put drywall up or you do plaster on the walls, and that's not an extremely difficult thing to do. And then you paint it and put down flooring and so on. So it's not a tremendously complex thing if you have the skills to do basic carpentry and you're looking for a basic home. If you're a really good carpenter and you have a friend who's an electrician and a plumber, you can probably finish the home quite simply. So the cost. Excluding the setup, excluding transportation, and just counting the walls themselves, if you looked at a 30 by 30 home, a small building that could be a 3-bedroom cottage and reasonably comfortable. So the square footage of the walls is how we cost the walls. So a 30 foot long walls, 4 of them, times 8 foot is just over 1,000 square feet. So our panels would cost approximately $25,000 to $30,000 a square foot. And so the walls themselves would cost you approximately $25,000 to $27,000, plus delivery, plus setup time. So this is a straw bale house. It's got a wood frame, which supports the infrastructure. So the wood supports the roof and the ceiling and so on. The wood frame is it's called post and beam essentially, and it's infilled with straw. So there are straw bales in the walls, and the walls are 18 inches thick, and they net out to an R value in terms of insulation of R50 approximately. It's plastered with an earth plaster both inside and outside, and because it's straw and because it's an earth plaster, and it's not like a porcelain, it dries permeable to moisture, so the walls can dry out. And so where you may get some water on the wall, you may have some water inside the wall for a while. It can always dry out. And so that drying helps to minimize any possibility of mold. I need very little heating and cooling to maintain this at a regular temperature. It's a wonderful climate to live in. It's healthy. It feels comfortable. I can touch the windows and they feel the temperature of the inside, not cold, maybe 20 degrees outside, and the windows are warm on the inside. The air is clean, and it's just a very comfortable house to live in. No drafts. These I like, and in fact, the bottom, to get this shape of the curve, is a set of tires that would have lain in a dump, and so they help to form the shell for the curve. And then the straw bales just come up from there, and it's trimmed off properly and then covered with the earth plaster. Now these walls are the plaster walls, and behind the plaster and behind my truth window is the straw. So I have evidence that we have straw. They're triple pane windows, which provides a huge level of insulation and allows the temperature inside to be very, very comfortable.
Because people won't believe how beautiful these houses are.
Normally this place is heated either with solar hot water that comes from a couple of solar panels, or our wood stove, which is the combustion air is externally ventilated, and that provides us with all the heating and cooling we need. If we want additional cooling, we have an air source heat pump, which provides essentially the air conditioning, or it can provide heating, auxiliary heating. Rarely used at all in the wintertime. Sometimes on the very rare hot days when there's a spread of several days of very high temperature, it may be used in the summer just to cool things down a little bit. But the walls hold so much energy that they tend to moderate any temperature changes and keep the house comfortable, no matter what temperature it is outside.
Many reserves already have all the infrastructures to house courses on sustainable house building techniques for women. This will bring back pride and create jobs on the reserves. We strongly endorse such a project. It's a win-win situation.
These are the Mohawk titles. So that's what that's what he's got up on the board there. So these first three, those are the Turtle Clan titles. And then those next three, those are the Wolf Clan titles. And then the last three, those are the Bear Clan titles. And then down here, those are the Oneida titles. And over here is the Onondaga titles, the Cayuga titles, and the Seneca titles. So when a chief passes away, when a condoled chief passes away, then they have a condolence ceremony. And so part of what they do for that is there's a song that they have to sing when they're doing a condolence. And this cane, it helps them to remember, whoever's doing the singing, it helps them to remember the order of how this goes together. And then all the titles, all the family titles for our 50 families in the Confederacy. So that's what they're learning about. They're learning about the Confederacy and all of our families.
Now they're able to build their own homes and do their own repairs and maintenance, which is a huge savings cost, on top of, you know, building their confidence and helping with their social structure and their home life with having their own jobs afterwards. So therefore they're you know, contributing to the community as well. Environmental friendly, you know, and then going with longer lasting products like the steel roofs versus the shingles, because, you know, it's a known fact that shingles you're going to have to change in so many years, where the steel roofs are pretty much lifetime. And there's so many more products out there now that are more of a lifelong period, or, you know, something lasting longer than 25 years. And again, it came down to funding in the past, that a lot of times you had to get the cheaper product to get a house done. And even then, those were shells back then. And it came down to, you know, sometimes it took people 2 or 3 more years just to get a washroom put in. And believe it or not, it still can be that way, because, you know, there's not enough funding all the time when you don't have your own resources. Yeah, we have overcrowding because many, again, homelessness is a huge factor on reserve and off, First Nations and non-Native. We've had 2 or 3 families living in one dwelling, and then we like to encourage them to go off reserve, to go to school and get their own apartment and whatnot, but a lot of our younger ones can't even do that because of the rent amount in the city. A single person can't afford $900 a month when you're only getting $600 to $800 a month, and they still have to go to school all day, and then even if they have a part-time job, the financials just don't work anymore, the numbers. And so then you have that problem. Then you have your young ones the first time starting out, getting their license. They can't afford a car right away and insurance right away to go off reserve to work, and that's where the jobs are. So that's a barrier as well. You have a lot of families, they do access the shelter in the cities just to give their families a break. But you're 30 days and you're done, and then you have to move to another shelter. So there's many of our families shelter hopping, they call it, and our singles. Singles get missed in everything, on reserve and off reserve. With anything that there is, the singles, there's just never anything open for them. And we have many that are, that's what they've been doing the last 2 to 3 years, is just 30 days here, 30 here, 15 here. And you're a grown adult and you have to share bathrooms. You're in a, one little bed. You can't stay there during the day, and in the winter time they do a little more in the winter because of the cold weather, but in the summer, if you go in London right now, you'll see them on certain streets by the groves. And that's a lot of them are First Nations.
I think housing is one of our hardest issues on reserve, is because people want houses, people that live in the cities want to move home, but we don't have that kind of funding to bring all these people back. And the land, a lot of our land is individually owned. I mean, the nation only owns a small portion of it, so that's the only land that's available. And if somebody owns a piece of property, they've sign the land over, and when the house is paid off, you get the land back. But
we can't even do that anymore.
No. Yeah, it's about getting people into houses that are complete, instead of you got $40,000, do what you can, good luck on the rest.
Yeah, there you go.
That's that's hard to swallow anymore with that.
I think everyone deserves a place to sleep at night, no matter who they are. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, or what color you are. We all deserve a place to sleep at night, and we don't have that in Canada, not just First Nations. It's happening. It's an epidemic.
Sleepwalking collar with nowhere to go, stepping back to work to put his head in a hole, yeah. Then he has the nerve to bitch and complain that all the walls around him are always the same. He has his problems, but don't we all? Start doubting questions, man, the answers will come. You want to change the world, you can't stand by. Just man, it starts inside.